and she hooks up with a man called Willie Brown. And it was a bit of a scandal. He was the mayor of San Francisco. But it was a scandal because he was 60, she was 29. Sort of got the tongues wagging a bit. And he gave her a couple of jobs that gave her $400,000 over 5 years for going to a meeting. But the real scandal should have been that Willie Brown was and remains a communist sympathiser. He was elected by the Communist Party. His main financial benefactor was Carlton Goodlett, a Communist Party member who won the Lenin Peace Prize. He worked with the communists in San Francisco, the same communists that Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi worked with. He became mayor of San Francisco. He was still endorsing Communist Party meetings 5 years after his affair with Kamala Harris was ended. Today, he is Communist China's best friend in the Bay Area. He and Dianne Feinstein have basically turned over San Francisco to the Chinese communists. They run that city. So then Kamala Harris gets picked up by a man called Steve Phillips. And Steve Phillips made her DA from San Francisco, California Attorney General, and now he put her in the White House. But who's Steve Phillips? Well, I want to go back a little bit. Who remembers the famous Rainbow Coalition of the 1980s? Jesse Jackson, the great scamster, he had this idea. The Black Panthers had the idea, you get the black radicals, you get the brown radicals, and the white radicals working together in a rainbow. So Jesse Jackson said, well, I'm going to run for president, and I'm going to get the white progressives and the black progressives and the yellow progressives, the Asians, the red progressives, the Native Americans, the lavenders, that's the gays, the greens was the environmentalists, the browns was the Chicanos. This is his terminology, not my terminology. This is his terminology. You get all the minorities together, which makes a majority. And so he ran twice for president. He got second in the Democratic primary, I think in 1988, got 7 million votes. Surprised a lot of people. They did better than they thought, but in those days, minorities were about 15%. Now it's more like 35% of the population. So his idea was sort of before its time. Now, the Rainbow Coalition was run by pro-Chinese communists. From the League of Revolutionary Struggle, Communist Workers' Party, Line of March, a little bit of help from the Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, Freedom Road Socialist Organization. It was a communist operation, right from bottom to top. But nobody would ever tell you that, but that's what it was. And one of these guys, who was Jackson's West Coast student organizer, was a man called Steve Phillips. This is the man who got Kamala Harris where she is now. Now, Steve Phillips was a member of the League of Revolutionary Struggle. Young black guy from Stanford University, a law student, very good friends with a very militant radical at Stanford at the time. He got to know her very well, and he got to know her family very well. That young woman was Maya Harris, Kamala's sister. So they worked together, and then Steve Phillips leaves Stanford. He brings most of the League of Revolutionary Struggle into the Democratic Party after 1989, and then he marries very well. Does anybody remember the Golden West Savings and Loan Company? It was the 5th biggest savings and loan in the US at one point, built on subprime mortgages. But they sold, the Sandler family from San Francisco sold that about 20 years ago to Wachovia Bank. They got $2.2 billion profit from it, and Steve Phillips married their daughter. And he used that money to buy himself all sorts of influence and access into the Democratic Party, right from the top to the bottom. In 2005, he went to Atlanta, Georgia, and met with George Soros and a whole bunch of left-wing billionaires, and that's where they set up what they call the Democracy Alliance. That's a very secretive gathering of multi-billionaire leftists. You've got to donate $200,000 a year just to belong to it. And they are now 200 members strong, and they have donated billions of dollars to the Democratic Party and left-wing candidates around this country over the last 10 years. Billions and billions of dollars. Soros alone has got $18 billion into it. In 2008, Steve Phillips got $10 million together and did a big voter registration drive in southern states and southwestern states amongst black and Latino communities. And that's what got his very good friend Barack Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton in the 2008 primary. Barack Obama was elected on the Rainbow Coalition strategy. Progressive whites, progressive blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Muslim Americans, the minorities joining together to make a majority. That's the strategy they used. And they screwed it up by running Hillary Clinton. Made a big mistake. 2016 gave Trump an opening. Well, Steve Phillips has written a book. It's the Bible of the Democratic Party today. It's called Brown is the New White, a New York Times bestseller. And this is his argument, really simple. He says the demographics of America have changed. Democrats, stop going after the middle. Stop wasting your time on moderate voters. Those 2% of swing voters in the middle, stop wasting your billions of dollars on them. There are millions of Democrats in the South, black, Latino, poor white, college students, Latinos. There are millions of people in the southern states who are effectively Democrats, but they don't normally vote. That's where you spend your money. That's where you put your dollars. So this is played out big time. We saw Virginia a few years ago used to be a very deeply Republican state. Red as red could be. Now it's blue as blue could be over a few years. This is because Steve Phillips worked with the local pro-Chinese communists from Liberation Road. They set up an organisation there called the New Virginia Majority. And they went out there and they signed up 300,000 minority voters and worked with Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, to legalise 200,000 Virginia felons and give them voting rights. That 500,000 votes is what flipped Virginia. And the reason they were so successful is because they were using very sophisticated GIS computerized mapping that every precinct in the state mapped out. They could tell you every ethnicity in every household. So they could send Ethiopian canvassers into Ethiopian households. They could send Puerto Rican canvassers into Puerto Rican areas. And they signed up all these voters and they eventually flipped the state. But the kicker is, those maps were generated on contract by a man called Steve McClure, a Liberation Road pro-Chinese communist, a graduate of the Geography Department of Howard University, George Mason University. But for the last 10 years, Mr. McClure has been generating those maps, working out of the Geography Department of Wuhan University, China. They're using Chinese computers and Chinese staff to generate maps to flip districts in the South. Their logic is, if you can flip 2 or 3 states in the South, that's the end of the Republican Party. It will never win again. The Communist Democrats will run America. Well, who's heard of the organisation Kentuckians for the Commonwealth? It's all over your state, people. It is the pro-Chinese communist operation in your state. They've been working since 1982 in your state. They're working amongst the black communities, the Latino communities, and they're doing exactly what they did in Virginia. They are the sole reason that Bashir is now your governor. They did it. Maoist communists in your state flipped your governor. They got rid of Matt Bevin and they gave you Mr. Bashir. And they're going to keep going till they turn your state just as blue as Virginia, if you let them. They're doing the same in Florida. They did the same in Georgia. This is why Georgia now has 2 Marxist senators. They did the same in Arizona, which is why Arizona now has 2 Marxist senators. They did it, remember Roy Moore in Alabama. Roy Moore should have easily won the Senate race in Alabama, but he got in trouble with the scandal. So Steve Phillips put $6 million into Alabama, and they mounted a campaign amongst the black and Latino communities. If you don't vote for the Democrat, the Klan is coming back. Vote or die, they called it. And they managed to turn a victory for the Democrats in deep red Alabama. So they are working the southern states And these are Chinese networks. And they're doing it right under your nose. The fact that most of you have never even heard of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and the GOP in Virginia hasn't even heard of New Virginia Majority, even though they wear orange t-shirts and walk around all over the place. And they wrote an op-ed in the New York Times claiming credit for flipping that state. This is happening right under your very noses. This is a Rainbow Coalition strategy. So Kamala Harris is the rainbow candidate. That's what she is. She is the perfect rainbow candidate. She's female, she's half Asian, she's half black, and she's relatively young. This is the perfect Rainbow Coalition candidate. And I was saying 3 years ago that Kamala Harris was going to be the candidate in 2020. And I lost a lot of steak dinners when she got taken out of the primary early. And I thought, oh, I'm wrong. But I knew I wasn't wrong. Because what happened, it was a contest. Bernie Sanders was running away with the primary. He was going to be the candidate. But he's too obviously communist, and he's white and he's old. It was not what they wanted. So they had to get rid of Bernie. And the only person who could stop him at the time was Joe Biden, because he had the South Carolina primary coming up, and they got Jim Clyburn, the black congressman from South Carolina, to endorse him. And Biden won the South Carolina primary, and that stopped Bernie Sanders' momentum. Then Biden went on to win, and he got in, and guess who he picked as his VP candidate? Kamala Harris, the one that the Chinese communists wanted all along. She was always going to be the candidate, folks. It just didn't work out quite to plan, so they had to get it in the back door. Just to cheer you up, we're in World War III now, folks. We're in the middle of a revolution, and we're in World War III. And by that I mean this. Donald Trump put tariffs on Chinese goods. And the Xinhua news agency said our response is people's war against America. What does that mean? They're going to put tariffs on our goods, does it? Ha ha. Big deal. People's war means way more than that. That's a Maoist term. People's war means every form of warfare possible to destroy your country before their soldiers even march. It is buying up your politicians. It's stealing your technology. It is burning your cities. It is cyber attacks. It's all of that. India just had a massive blackout in Mumbai done by the Chinese intelligence service because India has been challenging China in the Himalayas. It is all of these things. It's selling fentanyl to your kids. 30,000 American kids die every year from fentanyl from China. That's war. See, this is what China's doing to you now. So the COVID was deliberately spread by China. It was time for election year to bring down Trump. Because what was Trump's biggest strength at the beginning of 2020? The economy, right? Well, how was the economy looking about June or July? It wasn't so good, was it? Every time you have a pandemic, normally, the normal response is you quarantine the sick and everybody else goes about their business. Well, we were told we couldn't do that this time. The World Health Organization said that there was evidence of asymptomatic transmission, meaning people without symptoms were spreading the disease. And as we didn't have testing, we had to shut down everybody or there'd be 2 million dead by Christmas. That's what they told us. And Trump was thinking, well, if I don't follow this advice, I'm going to get blamed for every dead grandmother in the country coming up to the election. He was backed into a corner. Well, the World Health Organization is led by Mr. Tedros of Ethiopia. And if you look at his CV, that man was the former leader of that country's Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Communist Party. The man is completely in China's pocket. The war, the COVID, was people's war from China, designed to bring down your economy and bring down Trump. There's another very nefarious purpose too. One of Obama's biggest crimes was the damage he did to the US military. While he was in power, your Navy was building 9 ships a year, while China was building 60. China's Navy is now 5 times as big as yours. And when Trump got into power, he knew we were heading for war. We were going to lose. So he started building the military up as quick as he could, and he upped the military budget, exactly what he needed to do. But you can only do that on the back of a strong economy. What do you do with your military budget when your economy's in the toilet? And already 31 Democrats, led by the pro-communist Barbara Lee from California, the woman who's been to Cuba 22 times, have written a letter to the Armed Services Committee, which is also headed by communists, demanding a huge defence budget cut in the next budget go-round. So what happens if they succeed in gutting the US military? Which country then rules the world? Not hard to figure out, is it? So we had the COVID. We're just starting to recover from that. That's step one in Chinese warfare. Then we get the Black Lives Matter protests. All because George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, right? This was planned since 2016. It was done by two pro-Chinese communist organizations, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and Liberation Road. The Freedom Road Socialist Organization burnt Minneapolis, they burnt Kenosha, they burnt Tampa, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, and Dallas, Houston, Salt Lake City, East LA, and the Bay Area. All of the other cities were burnt by Liberation Road. Liberation Road was responsible for Black Lives Matter. The three women who started Black Lives Matter, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, and Patrisse Cullors, are all Liberation Road supporters, all pro-Chinese communists. They've got links to Vietnamese communists, the Palestinian communists, the Venezuelan communists, and even former East German communists. They're a completely communist organization, and they are controlled by Asians for Black Lives, which is a front for the Chinese Progressive Association in San Francisco, which is a front for the Communist Party of China. And the head of the Chinese Progressive Association and Asians for Black Lives, I've got him on tape boasting about his great relationship with the Chinese consulate, how he runs his messaging past them. This man funded Alicia Garza, the founder of Black Lives Matter. She is completely in bed with the Chinese Progressive Association and the Chinese. And Alicia Garza just happens to be very good friends of another Maoist communist called Latifah Simon, who just happens to be the best friend of another Maoist communist called Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is the Black Lives Matter president. She's president right now. So that's where we are. We are at war with China, and we're in a revolution. The Chinese are killing 30,000 of your kids every year with fentanyl. They're buying up your politicians. They're stealing your technology. They're buying up your food companies, your infrastructure, your land. They're subverting your politicians, corrupting your businessmen, indoctrinating your kids through their Confucius Institutes and all this kind of thing. They're doing all of that. They burn your cities. They wrecked your economy. But the good news is this: you can buy cheap toasters at Walmart. That was the deal you were sold. That was the deal that Kissinger sold America. He said, let's take all of the industry out of the Midwest. Let's send it all to communist China. And we'll lure the Chinese away from the Russians. And we'll build up their economy. And we'll make lots of money with their cheap labour. And we will make them our friends. And we'll all live happily ever after. Well, how's that worked out? You send all your high-paying jobs, sold out your own workers to send your vital industries to an enemy country to build up their military so they could destroy you, and that's a good deal. And that scam went on through every president since Reagan until finally Donald J. Trump called an end to it. And that's why they had to take him out. That's why they had to do it. Had he got a second term, and this is the tragedy of the century, he would have done to the Communist Party of China what Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He would have ended it. And he was working on that with the Indians. He was working on that with the Japanese and the Taiwanese and the Australians. Isolate China, bring down the Communist Party of China, liberate China. And you imagine a boon to the world, a free China. all of that energy, all of that culture, all of that enterprise serving good rather than evil. That could have been what we had. Instead, we have got China's friends in the White House running this country. That's the reality. Now, I hope you don't want to walk out now because you might do something and you'd regret later. I don't know. But look, if I thought there was no hope for this country, this beautiful country, I'd be back in New Zealand right now building bunkers and stocking up on baked beans. But I'm not. Massive hope for this country. I wrote an article the other day for the Epoch Times. I called it New Zealanders' 9 starter steps for saving America from socialism. And that went viral. You had 13,000 shares, and General Flynn put it out there, Sidney Powell put it out there, went all over the country. Congressmen, senators, all of them. And this is the very first step. The first step is real simple. Face reality. If we're going to save this country, we've got to face reality. QAnon's not going to come and save us. The military isn't secretly in control. President Trump's not going to come back on March the 20th or July the 14th or August the 16th or whatever it turns out to be. That's not going to happen. We have been outmaneuvered by the bad guys, by the Chinese, by the Democrats and the traitors within the Republican Party, like Mitch McConnell. So we've been outmaneuvered. So that's where we're at. First step, face reality. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll go through a few of them. The second step, a lot of people out there who are going, I'm done with elections. We got all the guns. We just got to march on Washington. We just got to have a revolution. We're going to do 1776 all over again. Well, there's a big flaw with that argument. A, imagine the slaughter. Imagine the chaos. Imagine the innocent lives lost. But imagine how difficult it would be to even win. Because all these people are assuming that the US military is going to say, yeah, right on, we're with you. The US military, Obama had 8 years to fire 200 good generals and put a whole bunch of left-wing generals in charge. When Trump was talking about the Insurrection Act, when there was big protests in Washington, Esper, who was then head of the military, said, we're not going to do that, President Trump. He publicly disobeyed the President of the United States, and he didn't get fired. That shows you who's in charge, folks. So there's going to be no salvation that way. And even if there was, even if we had a revolution, we look like we're going to win, do you think the Chinese and the Russians would sit back and not come onto our soil? Cubans, the Venezuelans, the Iranians? People think we're just going to be fighting other Americans. We got all the guns. And they're just wimpy liberals. It'll be fine. No, it won't. It'll be Chinese. It'll be Russians. It'll be Cubans. It'll be Iranians. And they will have no compunction about shooting Americans. None whatsoever. There is no violent way forward here. None whatsoever. So what are we going to do? What hope is there? Well, the third step, we got 30 states that still have Republican-controlled legislatures. Every one of those states has got to completely clean up their elections. Completely get rid of vote fraud. You're not going to change the blue states now, but you can change most of the red states. I see you nodding your head, shaking your head, sir. I understand. There are things going on in most of those states right now, but most of them are lacking the two key ingredients that we need. One is very, very stiff penalties for vote fraud. Nobody's talking about that. That should be a 15-year jail felony. That's worse than robbing a bank. Stealing an election is worse than robbing a bank. Do you not agree with that? Absolutely it is. But what do people get? A $2,000 fine and 6 months probation. It should be a major felony. The second thing should be no more electronic voting machines. Because even if their systems were foolproof, most of our sides still wouldn't trust them. They still wouldn't believe it. So the Democrats will all come and vote, but our side will say, nah, I don't trust that, I'm staying home. We just saw that happen in Georgia, right? We lost 2 Senate seats, 2 critical Senate seats that we should have won because Georgia Republicans were so disgusted by the election and so distrustful of the process, they stayed home in big numbers. And then McConnell blames Trump for it. It was McConnell's fault because he didn't fight for the election So the Georgia Republicans were disgusted and stayed home. So we've got to clean up the election critically in every possible way we can in the red states. Then the fourth step is this. We have to form a compact of free states. There are 30 states controlled by Republican legislatures. We're going to start by joining Florida with Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas right up through the middle of the country and form a block of free states right up to North Dakota and Idaho and Montana. So you have a country within a country. I don't mean secession. I just mean the 10th Amendment. What happens right now? The other day, Biden told Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, "You got to shut your restaurants down, Mr. DeSantis." And DeSantis says, "Take a hike, I'm not going to do it." Didn't quite say those words, though some a bit stronger. But anyway, so Biden says, well, we might have to cut air travel to Florida. Well, he might be able to do that to Florida, but if Florida joined together with Texas and Oklahoma and South Dakota and North Dakota and Kansas and Missouri and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Indiana and Ohio and Kansas, Nebraska and Idaho, he wouldn't be able to do that to 25 or 30 states. And then you bring in the red counties of the blue states. You bring in the red counties of Illinois and Minnesota and New York and New Jersey and California and Nevada and Colorado. That's 80% of the country you're looking at there. 80%. You get the red states working together as a team. Because this is a federation of independent states. The federal government serves at our pleasure. All powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. So I'm just saying, apply the 10th Amendment as it's meant to be. We will not take any unconstitutional orders from the federal government. You come after our elections, out of here. You come after our guns, out of here. We will not comply. And in the southern states like Texas and Arizona, the border states, they've got to start defending their own borders, independent of the federal government. Because we're going to see millions coming across from the south, folks, not hundreds of thousands like it is now. So you form a federation. Already 20 states have written to Biden saying that if you come after our elections with your H.R. 1, there will be major consequences. Remember, we have the water, we have the food, we have the people who work for a living. We have a lot of economic power, and they have nothing, but they tell us what to do all the time. Well, we've got to stand up. The 10th Amendment's there for a reason. Form that federation of states that stick together. Right now, Ron DeSantis is going to fine big tech hundreds of thousands of dollars every day they suppress conservatives. Well, that's great, but what if 30 states were doing that for people? 30 states were doing it. Big tech would become little tech very, very soon. Think of your 4 steps, but think of your economic buying power. You're the people who work for a living. You've got businesses, you have jobs, you're responsible people. You pay your bills on time. You've got power, but you don't use it enough. Everybody here should be committing. I'm never going to buy any communist Chinese products. Look at what you buy in Walmart. Don't buy anything from stores that do Chinese stuff. Look at your investment portfolio. Don't invest in companies that are investing in communist China.